Good morning, everyone. Welcome in. We have several people that are just hopping in the call right now. If you guys want to go ahead and get started, you can drop in the chat where you're located and your job title. Just wait a few more seconds. I have several people still trying to get in. Welcome, Amy. Welcome in, everyone. Happy Monday. Thank you for joining us on a Monday morning, taking time out of your day. Everyone's slowly trickling in, and that's okay. For those of you that are just getting on, go ahead and drop in the chat where you're located and your job title. Hello, hello. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And as you guys go ahead and drop in chat where you guys are located in your job, I'll go ahead and start with our intro. So thank you and welcome to today's webinar devoted to a topic that our presenters, as well as collaborative learning solutions, are very passionate about, which is our students, especially that kid. For today's webinar, moving away from that kid mindset, challenging the traditional system for students with significant emotional and behavioral challenges. We will focus on the why and who that kid is and move into strategies you'll be able to take away and implement as you continue in your work throughout the school year. My name is Dawn, and I will be your moderator today. I'll be behind the scenes supporting the presenters with the chat and any tech issues that may arise. Now to share a little bit about our company. Collaborative Learning Solutions is a K-12 educational consulting organization based out of Phoenix, Arizona. We have over 14 years of serving as a thought partner for schools, districts and states, regional and county offices, helping develop schools and climate guidelines and accountability systems that create safer, more supportive, and thriving learning environments. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. Kenny McCarthy, Otzi Sanchez, and Jenna Cataletta. Jenna and Otzi, Kenny, Otzi, and Jenna have been educational consultants at Collaborative Learning Solutions for several years. Jenna carries experience as a special education teacher, school-wide behavioral interventionist, parent educator, and district coordinator. She is passionate about creating and sustaining positive and inclusive educational practices that support all community members through humanistic and holistic lenses. Jenna enjoys weaving in her knowledge as a certified mindfulness and meditation instructor to support both youth and adult leaders with building social and emotional competencies. At the heart of her work, Jenna strives to ensure every individual feels safe and seen in their learning environment. Otzi's experience has primarily been in mental health as a licensed marriage and family therapist with several years experience providing mental health support on school campuses. She brings this background into her work with educators and supporting the needs of students, as well as advocating for the needs of educators. Kenny has served as a program director and special education teacher, specializing in the area of intense social, emotional, and behavioral challenged students. He's a trained administrator and special education teacher with a master's degree and expertise in classroom strategies. He provides consultation, coaching, professional learning services for educational programs that focus on the needs of students with significant social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. He's developed data tools to measure program fidelity and students' needs related to academic and social emotional behavior interventions and supports. Together, this trio are continuously inspired and motivated to be champions for educators and students alike. Having had many years of experience working with students that have been identified as challenging or sometimes even impossible, they are excited to share some of their expertise and experiences, including some of their work in providing effective support to these students with the most needs. And now I'll hand things over to Jenna to get started. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Dawn, for a warm introduction. So first, we want to start with the why. Why are we all here today? And when I think about the why, and when you're thinking about the why, we might be thinking about that kid. And I invite you in this moment, when you hear that word, that kid, an image of a student may pop up into your mind. You may even want to close your eyes and bring up a particular student, someone that you're currently working with now that is challenging for you, someone in the past that was very challenging for you. And just take a moment, bring that student up, or even those students. We've all had more than one over the years. And note, what were some of that child or that student's or those students' challenges, broadly speaking? Jot some of those challenges down. What were some of those students' lived experiences? What about interests? Things that light the student up. Strengths. What was this particular student or the student you're working with now that's challenging? What are they good at? And then if you had to guess, what could be some of the deeper beliefs that this particular student that you're visualizing now, what are the deeper beliefs that they may carry about themselves, about their school, maybe about you, their teachers, their administration, the teachers on campus that support them? So when we think about that kid, I invite you now in the chat, if you feel comfortable sharing, just what are some things that you wrote down that you might have felt, you might have seen about the particular student? What were some of those challenges? What were some of those lived experiences about that the student has experienced? Feel free to put that in the chat. Violence, witnessing violence, aggression, eloping, was kicked out of his house to live with grandma due to aggression, completely dysregulated, peer relationships, many diagnoses, new baby, sonic, caring, always in trouble, no, no, no. Human trafficking, has a father in prison, raised by grandmother, struggling with impulse control. Their need to control outcomes, power dynamics, unmet needs, pain. Strengths are standing their ground, sports and charismatic. Thank you, Marie, for naming those strengths. Yeah, oftentimes when we are focusing on that kid or that student, we tend to be immersed so much in the challenges. They can be so overwhelming for us that we forget sometimes about those strengths. Yeah, so oftentimes, as we saw in the chat, students that struggle the most have typically very challenging home lives. They are navigating through their lived experiences, trauma from the past, ongoing trauma that they're experiencing now, mental health struggles with emotional regulation, behavioral outbursts, aggression we saw. Sometimes there may be academic issues and struggles where we don't know if it was it the behavior and the emotional needs, or is it an actual academic need as well? We know that's a fine line in a marriage of academic needs and behavioral needs going together. And then strengths. Yes, typically, students that are struggling the most, they may be very resilient based on what they have gone through and what they're going through. They may be very creative. They may have the ability to be empathic. They may be very big feelers, but not knowing how to express those big feelings in a safe manner. What about beliefs? And there's a lot more in the chat here. I see neurodivergence as a result of trauma, aggression, extreme competition, and impulse control. No one believes me. Thank you, Jasmine. No one believes me as a deeper belief. And remember, these deeper beliefs for our students lie at the subconscious level. So consciously, they may not be aware of these beliefs, but these beliefs are the foundation that are connected to all of their lived experiences and their behavior. And oftentimes, when they're struggling, it's connected back to that belief. Like Jasmine said, no one believes me. Believe that they are not successful at all. They can't be successful. They can't be successful in school, on the playground. Tina said a belief that he is bright, but really feels like that he doesn't belong at school. Thank you. So I invite you and I challenge you, because as we're thinking about students with the most intensive needs, we have our own emotions that we feel. Jot those down as well. Please honor those feelings as well. That's going to be a part of the story as we're honoring the students' stories and lived experiences and thinking about solutions. Please keep yourself in mind about what you're feeling and you're experiencing as well throughout our presentation today. One more from Marie, and just a belief. No one listens to me or understands me. Not understanding me, why they are receiving consequences, because they are using maladaptive behaviors and they need outside of school for survival. Yes, a lot of the tools, although maybe maladaptive and we may view as negative, are just what they have learned over the years for straight up survival, getting through the day. Absolutely. I'm scared about what will happen when this student gets older and they can't change the behavior. Okay, so honoring these students' stories, what is the larger picture for students that struggle the most with behavior? What do we know? Well, here's some statistics. I'm not going to read through all of them. So what do we know about school discipline? And just take a moment and let's get curious what we see on the screen here. Some of these statistics around school discipline may be surprising. For a lot of us, they may not be surprising. It's tend to be the same trends over the years with school discipline. We know students with color tend to struggle the most with disproportionality with discipline and punitive practices with discipline, as well as students with special education status. We know that our Black students with disabilities are 2.5 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers. And with these statistics around school discipline, we know that they are more likely to be at risk. Here's some more statistics for us. Maybe note down anyone that was surprising for you. Now, when we looked at school discipline, and that was very much traditional school practices. What are we currently doing? What have we been doing over the years to support students with the most intensive needs? Well, there has been quite a bit of initiatives over the years, really starting back from the 90s with PBIS, or positive behavioral interventions and supports. And many of these practices take a tiered approach to support students with the most intensive needs. You could say students that have tier 3 needs. And what I love about a lot of these practices, taking a multi-tiered approach, we know that if we are focusing on building really strong tier 1 foundations, students with the most intensive needs will benefit from those tier 1 supports as well. And just take a moment and looking at this list, just note some of these may be familiar to you. Maybe you're using them directly in your classroom or as an administrator. You have implemented these practices over the years. Maybe they're new to you. Jot down any kind of connection that you have, what you've done, what you've tried, maybe what you don't know and you'd like to learn more information about. Now, when we think about that kid, we had some time to bring up a particular student or students that tend to that are struggling the most or did struggle the most if it was students in the past. We can get stuck sometimes as educators where that kid or those kids really becomes this type of mindset, if you will. So we're going to spend some time thinking about disrupting the that kid mentality, and I'm going to pass it to Otzi.
Thank you, Jenna. Exactly. So when we are in that space where we are trying to support or manage a student that has a lot of different challenges, and obviously in the chat, you guys have listed a number of challenges that really are, I just want to validate those first, because I don't want to minimize any of it. It all really is very challenging, and it all typically comes from some pretty complex trauma. It's not just one thing that this student is displaying. They are in survival mode. They likely have some pretty serious things going on at home, or they already have a pretty traumatic past or history. So they're exposed to a lot that they're bringing into the room. So they react the way that they're going to react because of whatever it is that they're trying to deal with. And their reaction is going to trigger us. It's going to trigger other students. And we are going to respond in kind based on where we're at as well, right? And there is going to be some impact, short-term impact, long-term impact. Jenna alluded to this a bit already. So you can see some of those short-term impacts, students being excluded or isolated, essentially just removed from the community, right? A lot of those kids want to be in connection with others. They want to be in connection with their peers, and their maladaptive behaviors may be excluding them from being involved in some of that because essentially they don't have the skills in order to appropriately react in certain situations. We might be trying to control the student, which may be working, likely is not, or does not work long term. We're going to see students that have some pretty severe mental health issues, some that are not being treated as much as they need to be, or they just might not have the support that's needed. So we might see students starting to use substances, starting to lash out, starting to get violent or aggressive. A lot of these things are going to show in student behavior as far as the impact of feeling like they are labeled as that kid. We also wanted to include a bit around the impacts for teachers and staff, because it isn't just them, right? As an educator that has to be in front of 30 plus students, we're going to feel our own things because of how this student may be triggering us. A lot of it is coming from helplessness. A lot of times we don't feel like we have the support to manage a student that has such high needs. So what happens with that is that we start to feel like there's nothing we can do. So what do we do in order to protect ourselves? We either disconnect ourselves emotionally as much as we can, Or we try to exclude that student as much as possible, get them out of my classroom, get them out of here. I can't deal with this. I'm trying to teach. We may blame the student. We may blame the family. We may try to make it somebody else's problem. Well, I don't do that. So I'm just going to hand this over to the counselor and allow them to manage all of that. We really just essentially want to not have to deal with them. And again, I don't want to minimize the impact of what a student that has those kinds of needs can bring to us personally. And the continuation of that mentality is going to have long-term impact. So you can see here some of the impacts that we see with students that are consistently labeled or treated like that kid. You might see law enforcement, juvenile facilities, substance abuse, mental health. Obviously, self-harm and suicide tend to have pretty high numbers. So those are some of those long-term impacts. And with us as educators as well, right? Sometimes we're starting to feel that burnout, that compassion fatigue. I might feel more isolated and alone myself because I'm in a silo trying to manage this behavior in this student. And I feel like I don't have enough support. There could be bias confirmation with future students, right? Well, I know this student, that kid now has a younger sibling. Now, what is that sibling going to bring to my room, right? Or I have a student that reminds me a lot of a past student. So then I end up with that confirmation bias with my future students, as well as impact on mental health and self-esteem as well. As educators, we work really hard to do the best that we can for our students. And when I feel like I'm consistently struggling with one or a few really challenging students, I may start to feel like this is not the field for me. Or I might think about, I need to retire. This just is not going to work out. I'm clearly not a good educator because why can't I reach these students? So managing a lot of these feelings long term, Jenna had mentioned kind of keeping an awareness about our own selves and how we're feeling with all of this. That really does take part in that kid mentality as well. Because if I'm getting to that burnout, it's going to be a lot harder for me to really humanize this student, right? So I mentioned a bit about mental health. These are some of the things that students may experience if they are that kid. It also is something we may experience as the educator trying to manage or support that kid, right? Because if I am just, okay, I know that kid is going to be in my fifth period, I may already be building up defenses in order to deal with that, to manage that, right? And then the more I do that, the more I'm looking for that kid to display some kind of behavior that I can react on, right? So it really goes hand in hand. And our students are, maybe experiencing past trauma activation. The way we said something, the way we yelled, body language could be potentially triggering them or escalating the behaviors that they're already displaying. So, and you'll just want to notice too, the biggest kind of circle on that image is that feelings of shame. And that's going for both of us, right? If the student is being called out time and time again, that is going to trigger some of that shame. And what is that reaction going to look like? And then for us as well, I'm feeling helpless as an educator. I feel like I'm losing my cool every time this kid comes into the room. And then I feel some of those feelings of shame as well, because I should be the adult in this room and why can't I keep it cool, right? So how do we disrupt that mindset? I'm, already halfway through this school year, maybe even more. I'm really struggling at this point and I just can't handle it. One thing we can do is be conscientious or cautious about some of our IEPs, present levels, diagnostics. I had one student that I was working with, he was 16, and reading his paperwork, I was coming in as a therapist, so I was reading his psych eval, and it had on there that he used to start fires. So you can imagine what some of my mentality was meeting this student, thinking, oh man, I have this kid in here who's really going to cause me some problems. And as I got to know him, I realized that may have been a behavior in the past. It was not anything I had to deal with in the 3 years that I worked with him. his foster parents as well, they didn't have that issue either. So I went in a lot more guarded with that student. And now knowing what I know, I have to remember just to take some of that information, not necessarily with a grain of salt, but just with a cautionary thought that what is written in there may not necessarily be where the student is at now, or the person that conducted that test, not to say that they were wrong or inaccurate, they may have been collecting information from before or from something else, or may have exacerbated it unknowingly. So just something that we want to be conscientious of. We want to remember that it's not just us. It can often feel that way because teachers often have their own students in their own classroom, and there really isn't anybody else to rely on. And we do have to connect as much as we can with our counselors, with our admin, with other colleagues, maybe the ones that also have that student, so that it doesn't feel like it's constantly just my problem. I also want to make sure that I have the support needed to really support this student. I want to make sure that I am still looking at this student as a human with needs, a lot of times really complex needs. A lot of times students that have the highest needs are the ones that need more of our compassion and our support. And sometimes just connecting with them on that human level will help with some of that behavior. I'm not going to say it's going to take it all away because I'm sure everybody on this call has made all kinds of efforts to really connect with students. And sometimes it takes time, it takes persistence, it takes patience. With the class that I was working in, I was with a group of high school students that had emotional disturbance. And it took me a good, maybe, I want to say between 3 and 6 months to build any kind of rapport with them. And I was in the classroom every day, all day. And I would sit next to them. I would try to start conversations with them. And as a therapist, I typically tend to be pretty good about building rapport with students. And with a group that had so much extensive trauma, so many of them that have like a stigma against therapists, for example, it took me a really long time. And even then, I didn't, completely click or connect with every single one of those students. So it took a lot of persistence to really continue to try to build that relationship. And they would irritate the heck out of me sometimes. So knowing that, I had to just make sure I would go back to this is a human being that's been through a lot, and I really need to connect with them in every way that I can, right? I would try to highlight their strengths. I would try to help them work on skills, especially some of those social skills they didn't necessarily have, and prioritize a strong relationship. So, and this is for all of our students, they need at least one adult on campus to connect with, right? And that we've seen time and time again, research has shown that just one adult can potentially be the difference between a student deciding to harm themselves or not. So these are just some of those ideas. I'm sure folks have others. And if you do, please feel free to share those in the chat because we really want to make sure that we are doing everything we can in order to move away from really labeling that kid. And just a reminder here, easy kids are easy to love. They're the ones that are our favorites. They're the ones that are very easy to connect with. And the harder kids are harder, meaning they're going to take a lot more energy, a lot more effort, a lot more support, a lot more patience in order to really try to help and support them and build some of those relationships.
Awesome. Thanks, Atsi.
Sure thing.
Yeah, and I've been reading through the comments as we've been going through. I definitely want to acknowledge even some of the strategies like working with younger students has worked. And sometimes that doesn't make sense, right? We have a kid that's super challenging, that might be a little bit aggressive, and we're like, wait a minute, you're going to send them over to the younger kids? Yeah, sometimes we've got to try things that really don't make sense or may not seem to make sense, but looking for the strengths in those kids. And some of those strategies do work. And of course, we're going to be supportive in that environment. Neurodiversity, one of the things we oftentimes do when we're supporting our district partners is helping them work through those psyche evals. And I was working through some just this past month. And so we have a student that's diagnosed ED, and he's with a group of other sixth graders, and he's got some areas of his IQ score showing up 135 or higher, and some other areas that are in the lower average range. And so you get some diversity there. And so they're like, okay, so how do we support the student? I'm like, based on these areas, I think he needs a little bit of advancement here. And so we got to attend to those needs appropriately. And so when we get to tiered systems of support, it's not always about kind of scaffolding down, but also scaffolding up and really understanding our kids and their strengths. I also saw in their families being blamed. And yeah, that's a big challenge as well, right? For many of us that worked with a lot of students, maybe have a couple of our own kids in our own home or just raised in a home with multiple kids, you know, not every kid is going to be able to be the same approach isn't going to work with them. And so we do have to be able to adjust. And if some of the parents just don't have the skill set, and I think that's the biggest thing, the skill set, the training to handling really challenging students, they're not going to be very successful, and they oftentimes do get blamed. I saw in there one student was rejected by 17 residential treatment centers. Yeah, and I don't know if this is a trend kind of across the country or not, but some of our partners out in California, we're seeing this more and more, where some of those private institutions are like, yeah, we're not taking this kid. And so it's kind of that kid mentality, right? Yeah, we're not taking that kid. And so just figuring out, okay, how do we support them at a comprehensive campus or within that district? And then I also feel like um, Tom was kind of leading us to this next section here as far as kind of like what systems, what frameworks do we have in place? And so we'll just quickly look at framework. And I will caution you, this particular framework um, we've developed out, through research and experience ourselves at CLS. This is specific for special education programs for students that might be diagnosed as ED, OHI, or SLD. But we are not suggesting that students with these intense needs necessarily need a specific program. All the strategies and supports that we discuss and talk about can be used in gen ed classrooms. And this could also be used at a school site and for maybe like an intervention program. And so you'll see real quickly with any type of program that we're supporting to build out, we definitely want to build, like, why are we even building this program in the first place? We got to have that. We got to have those values. How are we going to go about doing this? What are the values we've identified? And then what specifically are we going to do? Now, this particular image or infographic, this is for us at CLS because we collaborate consultant coach. It'll look different for a school site or program. And then who are the team members? I think this is so important because this is just not on the classroom team. All right. It starts at the district, the county, whoever's kind of at the top there, and then goes down to the site, then the classroom team. And then we also need a tiered team to support uh, either this program or just the students, right? And then we also have kind of a meeting cadence that we've set up when it comes to these different teams and when we suggest they might meet. And from that, we also have suggested team members that might be on each of these teams, and then some of their roles and responsibilities on those teams as well. And then we have our framework, our what we call our C5 or core five components. And again, this is through research and our experience running these programs. And I know all of you know this, and it's authentic relationship development, right? That's our number one. If you don't have a real relationship, building that quality rapport with a kid, you're not going to get very far, right? It doesn't matter how much experience I have or anyone else has. I can't just show up and use these research-based strategies with kids, and it's just going to work. You got to have the relationship. So if we can work alongside some other educators and they have the relationship with them and just kind of share some of that knowledge on the strategies and what that looks like, they're the ones that are really going to be able to carry it out. Second one is just rigorous skill development. And we have a really big focus on skill development. So this is almost kind of in opposition to reducing maladaptive behaviors. Really, what we're looking at is increasing adaptive behaviors. And this is the skill development piece. Cognitive collaboration. Here's where we're coming alongside kids and we're collaborating and thinking with them and teaching them how to think, right? Might be thinking a little bit differently. It might be giving them opportunities to think on their own. And then four is targeted growth. And targeted growth, a lot of this is around goal setting and having kids practice goal setting and then attributions. What does the kid, whether they meet the goal or not, what do they attribute their success or failures to? And then how does that impact their goal? And then finally, the equitable systems implementation. And this is the tiered system of support. And how are we supporting the students? Again, whether they need advancement, whether we have to scaffold down or scaffold up, whatever that might look like.
Okay, and I just wanted to share quickly, thank you, Kenny. On that last image, Kenny went through our 5 core components, and due to the limited amount of time we have today, we're really just going to focus on that authentic relationship development first. If folks are interested, maybe what we can do is really kind of build into the other ones and do future webinars on those other pieces. And given the impact, though, of those relationships, that's really where we felt we needed to start and really start building in, especially at this time of year where folks are feeling a little more burned out or just really tired at this point in the school year. It really is important to connect back to those relationships. When I was in therapy school, I had an instructor who used to say, you can have all of the best, most wonderful, effective strategies. And if you don't have that relationship, if you don't have that rapport, the impact of your strategies are going to be incredibly limited. So that's always where we want to start, is building those relationships. And in order to be able to do that, we need to start with our boundaries. And there's 2 different areas in regards to boundaries that we always like to address, because first it's our own personal boundaries. Who am I outside of my work? What are those boundaries that I'm putting in? Am I working through my lunch? Am I the last one to leave the school every day? For me personally, I'll be transparent about this. I used to know that my boundaries were a little off when I started to dream about my students, when I knew that I was putting so much into it. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because we always do want to prioritize our students. But when it starts to really kind of hold us down, it's going to impact the way that we are able to connect and build those relationships and maintain those relationships. So that is one part of healthy boundaries that we want to address. The other part is our relationships with our students, right? A lot of our students, especially the ones that do tend to have more of the needs or more of those challenges, have a history of trauma. And what happens with that trauma is that students are not shown, or they don't have that model for healthy boundaries. So on this image, you'll see this arrow, right? We've got this range between rigid and porous boundaries. So in case you haven't really thought about this before, we've got those folks, those students that are really closed off, right? I've learned that putting myself in a vulnerable position, sharing too much about myself, gets me hurt or makes me harmed. So I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to share anything about myself, about my family, about how I'm feeling, if I need help or not, because if I keep that wall up, I'm going to be safer. On the opposite end of that spectrum, we have the porous boundaries, and that is where I am sharing anything and everything that comes to mind. Everything is on the table, even things that would be deemed inappropriate. I'm just going to share with everybody because I really want to connect with others, and that's the only way I know how to. A lot of our students that are victims of abuse or assault tend to have more porous boundaries. They kind of go between one of the extremes, either the rigid or the porous, because they haven't been shown what a healthy boundary looks like. And there we see in the middle, we see that healthy boundary, which is where we want to land most of the time. We can also look at this range for ourselves, because even for ourselves, right? If I'm feeling a little more protective, I might put up more walls and boundaries, or I might share a lot with my students in an effort to really connect with them. What I want to do is make sure that I'm maintaining that healthy space and that healthy boundary. So as Kenny goes on to share some of that relationship building piece, this is just something we wanted to throw in there just for folks to be thinking about as we're thinking about that relationship development.
Yeah, thanks, Otzi. So important with those healthy boundaries for all of us, whether we're the ones supporting the students and modeling for them what healthy boundaries looks like for sure. So we're going to go over 5 concepts. They're really simple, but they're hugely impactful. And so all of you will probably say, "Oh yeah, no, I totally agree to that. I don't really see any challenges around that." Now, the hard part is actually doing them and doing them on a regular basis. And something like this paired with um, someone that could come alongside the staff in the classroom, teachers, instructional aides, principals, whoever might be supporting these students. Um, this allows you that are coming alongside of them to then build upon these other skill areas that you can really support and help them out with. But we need this work to be done first. So, first one, positive phone calls home. Again, this sounds really simple. So I'll share just a quick story. This was a quick background, high school program. This is specific for students that are coming back from non-public schools and residential treatment centers, and it was located on a comprehensive high school campus. Of course, we were across the parking lot, way out there in the portables. You know how that goes. Um, but we were able to transition students back in. But anyways, so this student started on a Wednesday and he is a junior in high school. We'll call him Damien. And so on Friday, it was my job to call home and say, "Hey, mom, here's what Damien did well this week. Great manners, super respectful language to me. It was really nice getting to know him this week. He attempted the schoolwork, on these few days, whatnot. And I just wanted to let you know." And she pauses and she says, "Is that it?" I said, "Yeah, that's it." And she was choked up. She said, "I knew it was you that was calling, but I almost didn't answer. I have never had any sort of positive phone call home before." And this kid was a junior in high school, right? Super easy, super impactful. Um, that kid was really tough. He had been in all sorts of different programs. One of the easiest kids I ever worked with, and he was super respectful. He still got into trouble. He still got caught smoking on campus, doing some other things, but we had a great relationship, and it was really easy to kind of guide him in a good direction. Um, the next slide here, you guys, this is in our resources, and so I'm not going to go, we don't have time to go through all this. So I'll just tell a quick story on these 5, but you'll be able to share this or work with some of the people that you work with similar students. So next one, one-on-ones. This was having a tough time with this one kid. And so I say that to start because a one-on-one is not something that's earned by the kids. It's just something that we do. It's just a practice that we do. Now, we had some freedom and some flexibility. And so I talked to this kid and I said, "Hey, first thing in the morning, would you be interested? Can I take you out to lunch today?" And he looked at me. He's like, all right, where are we going? I said, I don't know. Where do you want to go? So Subway, chose Subway. And so we go and we get our food and we sit down. And he says, so what do we have to talk about? I said, I don't know. What do you want to talk about? And he said, you mean like we don't have anything, like I'm not in trouble or anything? I said, no, I told you, I just wanted to invite you out to lunch. That's what we're doing today. He talked for the next 45 minutes about cars. He talked all about his passions. Again, this is a high school kid. I think he was a sophomore at the time. Talked about all about his passions and working on cars and how he does it on the weekends, etc. It was just a time to connect. And this kid was super challenging before that. It definitely helped with the connection piece. And um, we did this as a practice. First thing in the morning is when we would ask them, as opposed to waiting later in the day, because it's like that hard kids, it's hard to love. You wait too long in the day, you really don't feel like taking them later in the day, right? Uh, so that's it, one-on-one. Very simple strategy. You're just giving them uh, some of that one-on-one attention that they may or may not get elsewhere. Next one is kind of that mentor responsible adult. And this is just really acknowledging that we are in a mentor responsible adult type of role. We're not a peer. And there can definitely be confusion there when you're building rapport with kids and you want to be loved and liked by them. And so really what we're getting to here is maintaining that healthy boundaries that Otzi was talking about before. And so, yeah, you want to be able to joke, have fun with kids, and you need to remember that you're in that mentor role. So one of the things that we had one instructional aide, great with the kids, really good. And one of the things he liked to do was joke around with them, but he would joke around with them the same way they joked with him, maybe making fun of his weight or his hair or lack of hair or whatever it might be. And so he would joke with them back in that way, but coming from that almost like fatherly uncle mentor type of role, it was a lot more hurtful to them. And so that was one of our cautions as well, is kind of maintaining that professionalism. And so um, we don't send those kind of spears or those rods or those arrows down to the kids, right? We're in more of that uplifting, yeah, joke around, have fun, but make sure you understand that you are the mentor and they look up to you. Transparency. So now I would surprise kids with positive phone calls home. So we wouldn't let them know when it was something positive. And so when they did come home and they talked to their parent, that message came from the parent and it absolutely helped build the relationship more with us and the kid, but it really helped with the kid and the parent as well because they had something positive to talk about when they got home. And nine times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, that kid would come back much less challenging when they got something positive, at least for maybe a little while the next day that they showed up. They're still challenging, right? Um, but when it came to something, we're not saying don't ever call home for something maladaptive or some challenges. But we always let the kid know first, hey, we are calling home. This is what we're discussing and this is what we're talking about. And they'll try to talk you out of it. No, 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 this is what's going to happen. Like, look, I'm sorry, but um, I'm going to have to let your parent know that this is what happened. And why that is so important is because it builds trust. You let them know ahead of time. You don't surprise them, make the phone call and let their parent deal with it just because you don't want to deal with some of the backlash that's going to happen at school. You are going to get some backlash. It is going to happen. But that's part of this authentic relationship and building the trust. And you do have to bring some of those challenges directly to the students and you have to hold them accountable. Kids want to be held accountable. It it shows that they can trust you and that you care about them when you're able to hold them accountable for what they've done. Um, which brings us to the next part. You got to restore the relationship. So this is not a proud moment of mine, but I do like to share it because it's a little bit out there. So in this particular case, I was transporting students home for the day, and one of the kids did not like one of the other kids. And I was taking him out afterwards to go to the batting cages after school. Well, this other student purposely sat in my vehicle and would not get out because he did not want me taking that other kid out. And so I was so frustrated, I cursed the kid out. And I go, oh no, what did I do? I called my boss and I said, this just happened. I totally screwed up. I thought for sure I was getting let go after that. But he said, have you talked to the parent yet? I said, no, not yet. So I called the mom. I said, hey, this is what happened. I totally lost it. I apologize. Her response, she laughed and she goes, I know. I do that all the time with him. He's pretty tough. So good thing I got a good response from the parent. And of course, he had been receiving positive phone calls home before that. We had already been building that relationship. We had already been holding him accountable, right? So when something like this does happen, there was a big error on my part, we were able to go back and repair it. Now, in this case, even though I can argue that the kid was totally in the wrong, which he was, but I had to own up to my part, and I had to own up to my part that I was the responsible adult, and I'm the one that's going to go out of my way to restore the relationship. And so the next morning, I made sure I arrived at his house first to go pick him up for school. And I said, hey, man, I really want to apologize to you how I responded yesterday. It just wasn't appropriate for me. And it worked out great in that case. He apologized to me as well for digging his heels in and being so frustrated about the situation. And so, again, restoring the relationships, that really is on us as the adult. Whether we're in the wrong or not, we need to be the one to seek out the students and go to restore the harm that was caused, whatever that harm might be. And just another quote is from Dr. Bruce Perry. There's no more effective neurobiological intervention than a safe relationship. And that kind of closes us up for today and for this session. But we do want to open it up for some Q&A. And I will comment real quick in the chat, Mary. Yeah, he actually called me a couple of years ago. He was engaged and was looking for marital advice. Yeah, this is the kid I cursed out. But obviously we kept in contact over the years and had a really good relationship. And so that, I mean, it just felt great, right? He was reaching out to me for marital advice.
Atsi, I think you were going to do the closing connection.
Yes, sorry about that. Okay. So as we close out our discussion, please share in the chat one takeaway that you're thinking about or one action item you'll try during the remainder of this school year. I did just put a handout in the chat that kind of, it has all of the information that Kenny was sharing around the strategies for authentic relationship development. And oh, sorry, did I put the wrong link? My apologies. I'll get the right one in there shortly. Or the other thing is you are getting a copy of today's presentation. You'll have the recording as well as the slides, and then we'll include the handout as well if I can't get the right link to you right here in the next couple minutes. But if you could please put in the chat one takeaway, just something you're thinking about or something that you really want to try as you finish out your school year. We want to thank you again for being here and for being a part of this presentation. I know it's a pretty hot topic right now with a lot of folks that are experiencing some pretty challenging students this year. So again, thank you for being here. And if anybody has any other questions, I know we're running out of time, but if you wanted to contact us, we do have a feedback form. So you can use that form. You can add the question in there. You can let us know, hey, I really wanted to ask Kenny about this, or I really wanted to ask Jenna or Otzi about that. So feel free to use this form for that as well.
And Otzi in the chat, one takeaway I'm seeing a lot of people are coming in here. Let's see,
Fantastic.
positive calls home, promoting more positive phone calls, the one-on-one time, focusing on repairing relationships. Yes, Susan, you will get a copy of the slides as well. The one-on-one strategy time.
Kenny, looks like you have a friend in here. Herself from Victor High.
Yes, no, I've been to Mr. Purcell's classroom plenty of times.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, no, he works with a lot of kids.
And we do have a few minutes for a Q&A. Pop in a particular question. We'd be happy to have a conversation around that question.
Yep, these are definitely tools easy to implement immediately. Yeah, trust that we do provide support in that way. Most often we're supporting um, starting at a district down. That way we make sure we have all the whole team on board. But also we have supported with individual students as well. And we would definitely want to work with like a team, classroom team, district level team to help support with that student. Because again, we need to um, have someone with the relationship to be able to use the strategies effectively. Because even when we do some of our consulting work now, part of that is a big part of it is classroom coaching and collaboration support. And so we do come alongside educators and we do develop rapport with the kids in the programs. I'm usually in classrooms from like 8 to 10 days out of the month, inside classrooms, coming alongside the teachers, instructional aides, RBTs, school psychs, etc., working with them. And sometimes we're able to, well, I would say oftentimes actually, help build rapport with the kids and get to know them as well. So we can directly demonstrate some of the strategies. But even more effectively, we want to come alongside the other educators. And we can do that through demonstration or kind of guiding them through it.
All right, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A or
Awesome.
chat.
Yeah, and we do see like a site administrator as a pretty impactful, very impactful position as far as how well maybe a particular how successful a particular program might be at a campus. We definitely need admin support on that.
Okay, we are at time. If you have any last minute burning questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A. Just wanted to take a moment to on the screen is our approach to services. So all of our services are really supporting schools and districts in the climate and culture space. And so we have a number of initiatives. Many times we are taking an integrated approach to these initiatives. And oftentimes these initiatives are things that you're already doing. So we, like Kenny said, coming alongside through a systems approach to support you. We have references and resources from today. I do believe that you got the handout. If you didn't, if you're watching this recording later, we'll have the link. And with that, we want to say thank you. Thank you for coming today, taking the time, whether you were watching this live or through the recording. Thank you for taking the time to support your own practices as an educational practitioner, as well as supporting that kid and those kids who need you and care about you deeply.
And do we have the correct link for the handouts?
Dawn, were you able to get that link for the...
I do not have it. I will be sending out the recording and with the handouts and everything. Everything will be in a follow-up email because I do not have the correct link as of right now, but it will all be sent out to everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Don.
Thank you everyone for attending.